Evelyn's knees nearly buckled as she stared into those familiar hazel eyes, the same eyes that had followed her through London galleries, the same eyes that had watched her from coffee shop windows, the same eyes she'd thought she'd never see again. But this Marcus wore the pristine red tunic and polished brass buttons of the Royal Regiment, his posture military straight, his expression professionally neutral. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ceremonial drums. "You can't have been here for 3 years. You were in London 6 months ago. You were—" "Ma'am, I think you have me confused with someone else." His Scottish accent was perfect, refined, nothing like the clipped London tones she remembered. "Perhaps you should step back and allow the ceremony to continue." The crowd pressed closer, tourists raising phones to capture the pageantry. Evelyn's eyes darted frantically between the uniformed Marcus and the space where she'd seen the other one. Gone. The familiar figure had vanished as if he'd never existed at all. A child tugged on her coat. "Lady, you're blocking my view." She stumbled backward, her restoration kit slipping from her shoulder and scattering brushes across the ancient cobblestones. As she knelt to collect them, her hands trembling uncontrollably, she caught fragments of conversations around her. Magnificent ceremony. Been the same guard for years now. Such dedication to tradition. The same guard for years. But that was Marcus's face, Marcus's jawline, even that small scar above his left eyebrow from when he'd fallen off his bicycle as a child. A detail he'd shared during one of their early innocent dates before everything turned dark. Evelyn forced herself to breathe, to think like the professional she was. In art restoration, authentication was everything. You examined evidence methodically, compared details, verified provenance. Forgeries could be incredibly sophisticated, but there were always tells. She pulled out her phone with shaking fingers and zoomed in on the guard's face. The bone structure was identical, but something felt off. The skin was too perfect, almost waxy. The eyes, though the right color, lacked the intensity she remembered, that burning focus that had made her feel desired at first, then trapped. The ceremony concluded with martial precision. As the guards began their measured march back to the gatehouse, the Marcus guard's eyes found hers again. This time, just for a moment, his professional mask slipped. His mouth curved into the ghost of a smile, the same predatory expression that had haunted her dreams. The crowd began to disperse, but Evelyn remained frozen against the castle wall. Her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague at the National Gallery. "How's the Wallace collection assessment going? Need those authentication reports by Friday." Right. Work. Normal life. The reason she'd come to Edinburgh in the first place, to evaluate a disputed Poussin painting housed in a private collection. She was supposed to be at the appointment 20 minutes ago, but how could she focus on 17th century brushstrokes when reality itself seemed to be unraveling? A tour guide's voice drifted past. "And the current Royal Guard has quite a story. Young man joined up after a family tragedy, been absolutely devoted to his duties, never misses a ceremony, rain or shine." Evelyn pushed through the remaining tourists, following the guide. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "That guard, how long did you say he's been here?" The elderly guide beamed. "Oh, our Marcus? 3 years come October. Lovely lad, though he keeps to himself. Lost his girlfriend in London, poor soul. Threw himself into military service after that." The world tilted. Lost his girlfriend? Aye, tragic, really. She died in some sort of accident. He never talks about it, but you can see the grief in his eyes sometimes. Evelyn's breath caught. According to this stranger, she was dead. According to Marcus's own words, he'd been here for 3 years. But she remembered every suffocating day of their relationship, every manipulative text, every time she'd found him waiting outside her flat. She remembered the final confrontation, his rage when she'd threatened to call the police, and then, nothing. He'd simply vanished. She'd assumed he'd finally gotten the message. She'd been so relieved she hadn't questioned it. The guide moved on with her group, leaving Evelyn alone with her spiraling thoughts. She pulled up her contacts and scrolled to her best friend's number. Sarah would remember. Sarah had been the one urging her to leave Marcus, to get help, to take his stalking seriously. But as her thumb hovered over the call button, a new terror crept in. What if Sarah didn't remember Marcus the way Evelyn did? What if no one did? Her phone buzzed again, this time with an unknown number. "Welcome back to Edinburgh, Evelyn. I've missed you." The message appeared and vanished so quickly she almost thought she'd imagined it. But the screenshot she'd frantically taken proved otherwise, for now. Evelyn's hands shook as she stared at the screenshot. The words burned into her vision even as the original message had vanished without a trace. "Welcome back to Edinburgh, Evelyn. I've missed you." She pressed the call button before she could lose her nerve. "Sarah? Thank God you picked up." The relief in her voice was palpable as her best friend's familiar laugh filled the line. "Evie, how's Scotland treating you? Please tell me you're not calling to complain about the weather already." For a moment, Evelyn felt anchored by Sarah's warmth, by the normalcy of their friendship that had sustained her through the darkest period of her life. "Sarah, I need you to tell me about Marcus, about what you remember." The pause stretched too long. "Marcus? Honey, are you feeling all right? You sound... Please, just tell me what you remember about him, about us." "Evelyn." Sarah's voice carried that careful tone people used with the fragile. "You know I'm always here for you, but I think maybe you should talk to someone professional about this. You've been through so much trauma, and sometimes our minds..." "What trauma?" The words came out sharper than intended. "Sarah, what exactly do you think happened to me?" Another pause. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was gentle but firm. "The accident, love, the hit and run. You were in hospital for weeks, and when you came out, you weren't the same. The head injury, the memory issues." Evelyn ended the call, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Accident? Hospital?" She touched her scalp instinctively, searching for scars she'd never noticed, evidence of trauma that didn't exist in her memory. Her fingers found only smooth skin beneath her auburn hair. The cobblestones beneath her feet felt unstable as she made her way down the Royal Mile, past tourists clutching tartan scarves and street performers playing bagpipes. Everything looked exactly as it should, Edinburgh in all its historic glory, but the familiar had turned sinister. Shop windows reflected her pale face back at her, but she found herself checking for other reflections, other figures that shouldn't be there. Her flat in Newtown was supposed to be her sanctuary. After fleeing London, fleeing him, she'd chosen the second floor of a Georgian townhouse specifically for its clear sight lines and single entrance. The elderly landlord, Mr. Sinclair, lived downstairs and kept watch over the building with the dedication of a retired police sergeant, which he happened to be. "Afternoon, Miss MacLeod," he called from his garden as she approached. "How went the castle today? Still working on that painting authentication?" The normal exchange should have comforted her, but instead she found herself studying his expression for any signs of deception. "Mr. Sinclair, have I ever mentioned an ex-boyfriend to you? Someone from London?" His weathered face creased in thought. "Can't say you have, lass. You're quite private about such things. Though you did mention that accident that brought you north. Terrible thing, losing your memory like that. Losing your memory." The words followed her up the narrow staircase to her door. Inside, her flat revealed itself in neat, careful order, exactly as she'd left it. Art books arranged by period, conservation tools organized with professional precision, her easel positioned to catch the best northern light for detailed work. This was her life now, safe, controlled, predictable. She moved to her laptop and opened her professional email, desperate for normalcy. 3 new authentication requests, including one from the Louvre that made her pulse quicken with professional excitement. Dr. Evelyn MacLeod was respected in her field, known for her meticulous analysis and ability to spot even the most sophisticated forgeries. Her expertise with Renaissance and Baroque works had landed her positions at major galleries across Europe. But as she scrolled through the emails, one subject line made her breath catch. "Regarding your inquiry about military records." She didn't remember making any such inquiry. The email was from a records office she'd never heard of, dated 3 days ago. Dear Ms. MacLeod, we regret to inform you that the individual you inquired about, Marcus James Hartwell, was killed in action in Afghanistan on October 15, 2018. His remains were repatriated and interred at Brompton Cemetery. We hope this information assists with your research. October 2018. If Marcus had died then, their entire relationship had been impossible. She remembered Christmas 2018, his possessive grip on her arm at her office party. She remembered Valentine's Day 2019, the expensive necklace that had felt more like a collar than a gift. She remembered every suffocating month until she'd finally fled to Edinburgh in early 2023, unless she remembered none of it correctly. Her reflection in the darkening window showed a woman she barely recognized, pale, uncertain, questioning everything she thought she knew about her own life, the successful career, the careful routine, the safety she'd built for herself in this ancient city. All of it suddenly felt as fragile as the centuries-old paintings she spent her days trying to preserve. Her phone buzzed again, another unknown number. Don't trust what they tell you. Meet me tomorrow at Arthur's Seat, sunrise. Come alone, or you'll never know the truth about what really happened to you. Evelyn stared at the message until her eyes burned, reading and rereading the words that seemed to pulse with menace in the blue glow of her phone screen. Don't trust what they tell you. The unknown number offered no clues, just as the previous message had vanished without explanation. Arthur's Seat, Edinburgh's ancient volcano, rising like a sleeping giant above the city. She'd hiked it twice since moving here, drawn by the promise of perspective that only came from standing 800 feet above the confusion of daily life. At sunrise, it would be deserted except for the most dedicated fitness enthusiasts and photographers chasing the perfect shot of the city awakening below. The perfect place for someone who didn't want to be seen, or the perfect place for someone to disappear. Her laptop remained open, the military records email glowing accusingly in her peripheral vision. Marcus James Hartwell killed in action, but she could still feel the phantom pressure of his fingers around her wrist from encounters that the calendar claimed were impossible. Could trauma really rewrite memory so completely? Could a head injury, an accident she apparently couldn't remember, have fabricated an entire relationship out of nothing? The rational part of her mind, the part trained in methodical analysis and evidence-based conclusions, whispered that psychological breaks were more common than people wanted to admit. Grief, trauma, and head injuries could create elaborate false memories. Faces could be confused, timelines scrambled. The Marcus at the castle could be an unfortunate stranger bearing a resemblance to someone from a half-remembered past. But the messages on her phone weren't delusions. She moved to her kitchen and put the kettle on, desperate for the ritual of normalcy. As steam began to rise, she caught sight of something that made her blood freeze. Tucked beneath her sugar bowl was a small piece of paper that hadn't been there that morning. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it. In handwriting that sent ice through her veins, handwriting she recognized with the certainty of muscle memory, were 3 words: "I've been waiting." The kettle's whistle shrieked, making her jump and knock over the sugar bowl. White crystals scattered across her counter like scattered bones as the sound echoed through her flat. She shut off the burner and stood in the sudden silence, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain it could be heard in the flat below. Someone had been inside her home. Her eyes darted to the windows, locked. The door. She'd used both deadbolts when she entered. Mr. Sinclair would have noticed anyone unusual entering the building. He watched the street with the dedication of a man who'd spent 40 years in uniform. Yet somehow someone had been here, had touched her things, had left her a message in handwriting that belonged to a man supposedly dead for 5 years. She pulled up her phone's camera and photographed the note, then immediately sent copies to her cloud storage and email. If messages could vanish, she wasn't taking chances. The handwriting analysis techniques she'd learned for authenticating historical documents might prove useful for more than Renaissance masters. But as she studied the image on her phone, doubt crept in. Was the handwriting really Marcus's, or was her traumatized mind making connections that didn't exist? In her field, she'd seen collectors become so convinced of a painting's authenticity that they'd rationalize away obvious signs of forgery. Desire could blind even experts to evidence. The choice crystallized before her with terrifying clarity. She could ignore the message, delete the unknown number, throw away the note, and continue building her quiet life in Edinburgh. Schedule an appointment with a therapist to address whatever psychological break had created these false memories and paranoid episodes. Return to her authentication work, to the safe world of historical mysteries that could be solved with scientific analysis and scholarly research. Or she could go to Arthur's Seat at sunrise. Going would mean accepting that something beyond her understanding was happening. It would mean stepping away from the safety she'd carefully constructed and walking deliberately toward danger. Because even if the messages were real, even if someone was playing an elaborate game with her sanity, meeting a stranger at an isolated location before dawn was exactly the kind of decision that got women killed. But staying meant living forever with the question. Her phone lit up with another message from the same unknown number. Sunrise, Evelyn. Come alone or spend the rest of your life wondering if you're insane. The words hit like a physical blow. Whoever was messaging her understood exactly what they were offering, answers, or the eternal torment of uncertainty. They knew her well enough to understand that for someone whose profession demanded truth, whose entire identity was built on distinguishing real from false, the not knowing would be its own form of torture. She looked around her carefully ordered flat, at the life she'd built from fragments she was no longer sure she could trust. Tomorrow at sunrise, she would learn if her memories were lies, if her safety was illusion, if her very identity was built on a foundation of trauma and delusion. The choice was made before she consciously realized it. She would go to Arthur's Seat, even if it destroyed everything she thought she knew about herself. The decision felt final in that moment, sitting in her kitchen surrounded by spilled sugar and the lingering whistle of the kettle. But as the hours crawled toward midnight, Evelyn's resolve began to fracture like paint on an over-restored canvas. She sat on her bed, fully clothed, staring at her hiking boots. They waited by the door like patient sentinels, ready for a journey that could be her last. The rational arguments circled her mind with increasing urgency. Women who met strangers in isolated places at dawn became statistics, became cautionary tales, became names whispered in coverage of their own disappearances. "What are you doing, Evelyn?" The voice in her head sounded like Sarah, like every safety seminar she'd ever attended, like the careful woman who'd built this protected life in Edinburgh precisely to avoid situations like this. She'd spent 6 months learning to feel secure again. 6 months of checking locks twice, of choosing well-lit routes, of building routines that kept her safe. Now she was planning to throw it all away for the promise of answers from someone who might be delusional, or worse. Her laptop sat open on the bedside table, cursor blinking in a search bar. She'd been researching hiking safety, emergency protocols, ways to share her location with authorities. But each precaution felt inadequate against the magnitude of what she was contemplating. If someone wanted to hurt her on Arthur's Seat, all the location sharing in the world wouldn't help until it was too late. The handwritten note lay beside her keyboard, photographed and documented, but still incomprehensible. "I've been waiting." 3 words that could mean anything. A patient lover, a determined stalker, a figment of her damaged psyche made manifest through her own unconscious actions. She'd heard of people writing themselves notes during dissociative episodes, creating elaborate scenarios their conscious minds couldn't remember. What if she was the one playing games with herself? Her phone showed 2:17 a.m. Sunrise was at 6:43. 4.5 hours to continue this endless cycle of doubt, 4.5 hours to find a reason to stay home, to choose safety over answers, to accept that some mysteries were too dangerous to solve. She moved to her window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Edinburgh slept below her, a city built on layers of history where the present constantly bumped against the past. How many people had stood at windows like this throughout the centuries, wrestling with choices that could change everything? How many had chosen safety and spent their lives wondering what they'd missed? But how many had chosen danger and never lived to regret it? The military records email still glowed on her screen. Marcus James Hartwell, killed in action. The dates were clear, official, backed by government databases that didn't lie, yet the man at the castle had worn Marcus's face with such precision that even now, hours later, she could recall every familiar detail, the slight asymmetry of his smile, the way his left eyebrow sat just fractionally higher than his right, the exact shade of green in his eyes that had once made her feel seen, then trapped, then terrified. If Marcus was dead, who was wearing his face? If he was alive, why did official records claim otherwise? If she was hallucinating, why could she photograph the evidence? Each possibility led to darker implications than the last. Don't trust what they tell you. The words from the final message echoed with new significance. Sarah's careful tone about accidents and head injuries, Mr. Sinclair's casual mentions of memory loss, even her own professional colleagues treating her like someone fragile, someone to be handled with care. What if the entire narrative of her Edinburgh life was constructed? What if the trauma everyone referenced so gently was something other than what they claimed? Her hands found the silver pendant at her throat, a Celtic knot she'd bought during her first week in the city. It was real, solid, a tangible anchor to the life she remembered building. But even physical evidence could be planted, memories could be altered, and paranoia could make conspiracies out of coincidence. The clock read 2:31 a.m. Dawn crept closer with inexorable persistence. She could still change her mind. Sleep until noon, spend the day at the gallery losing herself in the safe mysteries of Renaissance brushwork. Call a therapist, schedule regular appointments, address whatever psychological break was fracturing her reality. Build a normal life based on accepting the limitations of her damaged memory. But the photograph of the note glowed on her phone screen. The hiking boots waited by the door, and somewhere in the darkness, sunrise approached Arthur's seat like a deadline she couldn't negotiate. The woman who'd fled London would choose safety. The woman who'd survived whatever trauma had brought her north would protect the life she'd carefully constructed. But the woman who spent her days distinguishing truth from forgery, who'd built her identity on the pursuit of authentic understanding, couldn't walk away from the only chance she might ever have for real answers, even if those answers destroyed her. The silver pendant felt cold against her palm as Evelyn closed her fist around it, making her decision with the finality of a blade cutting canvas. 2:31 a.m. became 2:32, then 2:33, each second carrying her further from the possibility of retreat. She rose from the bed with movements that felt disconnected from her conscious will, as if watching someone else inhabit her body. The hiking boots felt heavier than they should as she laced them with methodical precision. Each eyelet threaded, each loop tightened, each knot secured, small rituals that marked her passage from the woman who might still choose safety to the woman who had already chosen truth, whatever its cost. Her hands moved with the same careful attention she brought to restoration work, but instead of preserving something precious, she was preparing to risk everything she'd built. The waterproof jacket came next, pockets checked and double-checked. Phone fully charged, portable battery pack, flashlight, emergency whistle, the accessories of someone planning to return, even as every instinct screamed that she was walking toward a precipice from which there might be no climbing back. The irony wasn't lost on her, preparing so carefully for a meeting that could render all preparation meaningless. Her flat keys felt foreign in her palm as she locked the deadbolts behind her. The sound echoed in the narrow hallway with a finality that made her pause on the threshold. Through Mr. Sinclair's door below, she could hear the soft murmur of his television, late-night programming for insomniacs and security-minded landlords. Part of her wanted to knock, to confess everything to someone whose 40 years in uniform might offer practical guidance. But the message had been explicit: come alone. The streets of Newtown stretched empty before her, Georgian facades standing like silent witnesses to her passage. Her footsteps echoed off the cobblestones with a rhythm that seemed too loud, too exposed, announcing her presence to anyone who might be watching. Every shadow could hide an observer, every parked car could conceal someone waiting. The familiar route to Arthur's seat, traveled twice before in broad daylight with other hikers nearby, transformed into something alien and threatening in the pre-dawn darkness. As she walked, the city seemed to peel away its civilized veneer, The tourist-friendly Edinburgh of festivals and castle tours gave way to something older, more primal. This was the landscape that had witnessed executions and witch trials, where bodies had been sold to anatomists and justice dispensed with medieval brutality. The very stones beneath her feet had absorbed centuries of secrets, and now she was adding her own to their burden. Past the Parliament building, past the palace, the bulk of Arthur's Seat rose against the star-pricked sky like a sleeping giant waiting to wake. The ancient volcano had stood here for 340 million years, watching ice ages come and go, seeing Romans march and retreat, observing the rise and fall of kingdoms. In the face of such permanence, her individual crisis felt simultaneously insignificant and utterly consuming. The path began its upward climb, and with each step, Evelyn felt herself leaving behind not just the safety of the city, but the entire framework of rational decision-making that had governed her adult life. She was crossing into territory where normal rules didn't apply, where dead men wore familiar faces and impossible relationships left tangible evidence. Every footfall took her further from the woman who authenticated paintings into the woman who would authenticate the truth of her own existence. The beam of her flashlight carved a narrow corridor through the darkness ahead, illuminating rough stone and hardy grass, but leaving everything beyond its reach shrouded in uncertainty. It felt like a metaphor for her entire situation, a small circle of clarity surrounded by vast unknowns. She could only see the next few steps, never the full scope of where this path might lead. Her breathing came harder now, not from exertion but from the weight of what she was doing. With each meter of elevation gained, she was climbing away from the life she'd known towards something that might destroy her sanity, her safety, or her very understanding of reality itself. There would be no casual retreat from whatever waited at the summit, no pretending this had been a spontaneous morning hike if things went wrong. Behind her, Edinburgh sprawled in darkness punctuated by scattered lights, windows where other people slept peacefully, unaware that someone among them was walking deliberately toward either revelation or destruction. The city looked small from this height, manageable, a place where problems could be solved through normal channels and mysteries unraveled through careful research. But that was the world she was leaving behind. Above her, somewhere in the darkness near the summit, sunrise waited with whatever answers it would bring. There was no turning back now, no safe path down that wouldn't leave her forever wondering what she might have learned. She had crossed the threshold from safety into the unknown, from doubt into terrible, necessary action. The woman who spent her days distinguishing truth from forgery was climbing toward the ultimate authentication, discovering whether her own life was real or the most elaborate deception of all. The summit materialized through the darkness like a revelation she wasn't prepared for. Evelyn's flashlight beam swept across the ancient stone cairn that marked Arthur's Seat's peak, and her breath caught, not from the climb, but from what the light revealed. She wasn't alone. A figure stood silhouetted against the eastern horizon, but it wasn't the person she'd expected to meet. This was a woman, perhaps 60, wearing practical hiking gear and holding what appeared to be professional camera equipment. The stranger turned at the sound of Evelyn's approach, and in the crossbeam of their flashlights, Evelyn saw a face marked by intelligence and something that looked disturbingly like recognition. "Ms. MacLeod," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight Scottish accent. "I was hoping you'd come." Evelyn's hand instinctively moved toward the emergency whistle in her pocket. "Who are you? Where's—" She stopped, realizing she didn't know what name to use. "Marcus? The person sending messages? The dead man who wasn't dead? My name is Dr. Helen Morrison. I'm a researcher with the University of Edinburgh's Department of Psychology." The woman lowered her flashlight to reduce the glare between them. "Specifically, I study cases of induced memory displacement and identity manipulation. I've been tracking your situation for the past 3 weeks." "Tracking my situation?" The words came out sharper than Evelyn intended. "What exactly is my situation?" Dr. Morrison gestured toward a flat area near the cairn. "Would you mind if we sat? This is going to be difficult to explain, and you've just climbed quite a distance." Every instinct screamed at Evelyn to run. This wasn't what she'd expected, but then nothing about the past few days had aligned with expectation. She remained standing, flashlight trained on the older woman's face. "Start explaining. Now." "You're not the first person to receive messages from Marcus Hartwell," Dr. Morrison said quietly. "Over the past 18 months, we've documented 7 other cases, all women, all with histories of relationships that ended traumatically, all relocated to new cities where they thought they were safe." The words hit like physical blows. 7 others? The pattern is always the same. Sightings of the ex-partner in impossible circumstances. Messages that demonstrate intimate knowledge of personal details. Evidence that contradicts rational explanation. Dr. Morrison pulled a tablet from her backpack. "The difference with your case is that you have professional training in authentication and documentation. Your photographs, your systematic approach to gathering evidence, you've created the most complete record we've seen." Evelyn's legs suddenly felt unsteady. She sank onto the stone Dr. Morrison had indicated, her mind reeling. "Are you saying this has happened to other women? The same exact thing?" Variations on a theme. Different names, different faces. But the psychological methodology is identical. The tablet screen glowed as Dr. Morrison scrolled through what appeared to be case files. Someone has developed a remarkably sophisticated system for psychological manipulation, using deep personal information and advanced technology to recreate deceased or disappeared partners. Technology? Evelyn's voice sounded foreign to her own ears. Facial reconstruction algorithms, voice synthesis, behavioral modeling. The kind of techniques that were experimental 5 years ago, but are now available to anyone with sufficient resources and technical knowledge. Dr. Morrison's expression was grim. "The question we've been unable to answer is why. What's the purpose? What do they gain from this elaborate psychological torture?" The eastern horizon was beginning to lighten, the faintest suggestion of dawn painting the sky in shades of gray. Evelyn stared at it, trying to process information that rearranged everything she thought she understood about her situation. The messages said to come alone. They always do, but in every previous case, no one actually appeared at the designated meeting location. The women waited alone, then returned home to find more messages, more evidence, more psychological pressure. Dr. Morrison's voice carried a note of concern. "Your case is the first where someone other than the victim showed up. Other than you. I've been monitoring communications to your phone number. When the message about Arthur's seat came through, I knew I had to intervene." The older woman's expression was troubled. "Miss MacLeod, I believe your tormentor is escalating beyond the previous pattern. That makes you significantly more dangerous to encounter, but also potentially more valuable as a source of information." Evelyn's phone buzzed. Both women tensed as she pulled it out, the screen glowing with a new message from the familiar unknown number. "You brought a friend, Evelyn." "That changes everything." Dr. Morrison cursed under her breath. "They're watching us. Then, they're real. This isn't psychological manipulation. Someone is actually here." "Oh, they're very real." "But Ms. MacLeod," Dr. Morrison's voice carried a warning that made Evelyn's blood chill. "The other 7 women who received these messages? 3 of them are missing. 1 was found dead. The remaining 3 refused to speak about their experiences." The sunrise painted Arthur's seat in shades of gold and red, beautiful and terrible as revelation. The message hung between them like a blade suspended in air, its implications cutting through the dawn silence. Evelyn stared at her phone screen until the words burned into her retinas. "You brought a friend, Evelyn. That changes everything. We need to leave," Dr. Morrison said, already shouldering her equipment bag. "Now." But Evelyn couldn't move. 7 women, 3 missing, 1 dead. The mathematics of horror rendered in clinical terms that somehow made it worse, not better. She'd spent 3 days believing she was losing her sanity, and now discovered she was merely the latest target in a pattern of systematic psychological destruction. The dead woman, she heard herself ask, how did she die? Dr. Morrison's hesitation lasted a heartbeat too long. Suicide. Apparent suicide. She left a note claiming she couldn't tell what was real anymore. The words landed like stones in Evelyn's chest. She thought of her own moments of desperate doubt, the 3 a.m. inventory of her sanity, the careful documentation that had felt like her only anchor to reality. How close had she come to that same breaking point? How many more messages, how many more impossible sightings would it have taken? Ms. MacLeod, we really do need to move. Dr. Morrison's voice carried new urgency. If they're watching us, this location is compromised. We need to get you somewhere safe. Safe? Evelyn laughed, the sound harsh against the morning air. Where exactly would that be? You just told me 3 women are missing. Do you think they felt safe right up until they disappeared? Her phone buzzed again. This time, the message made her blood freeze. Ask Dr. Morrison about the funding for her research, Evelyn. Ask her who pays for her to track broken women. Evelyn looked up to find Dr. Morrison's face had gone pale. What funding? She asked quietly. Ms. MacLeod. What? Funding. Each word fell like a hammer blow. Dr. Morrison's hands moved to her equipment bag, but not in the casual way of someone organizing gear. Her fingers found the zipper with the practiced efficiency of someone accessing something specific. The research is complicated. There are ethical considerations. Jesus Christ. Evelyn scrambled backward across the stone, putting distance between them. You're part of this. You're part of whatever's happening to us. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. Evelyn's voice cracked with fury and betrayal. Tell me why someone who claims to be helping me knows exactly when I'll be here. Tell me why my tormentor knows about research funding you haven't mentioned. Dr. Morrison's hand emerged from her bag, holding what looked like a small medical device. The research is designed to understand the psychological breaking points of trauma survivors, to develop better therapeutic interventions. By driving women insane? By observing the process. By documenting how manufactured psychological pressure interacts with existing trauma responses. Dr. Morrison's academic tone made the confession more horrific, not less. You have to understand the applications for treating PTSD, for helping people distinguish between real and false memories. Evelyn's world tilted on its axis. Everything, the messages, the sightings, even this moment of supposed revelation, was choreographed. She wasn't a victim seeking answers. She was a test subject being observed. How long have you been watching me? Since before you moved to Edinburgh. Dr. Morrison took a step forward, the device in her hand catching the morning light. Your profile was perfect. Recent trauma, geographic relocation, professional skills that would create detailed documentation. The London incident with Marcus provided ideal source material for the psychological reconstruction. The London incident? Evelyn's voice sounded distant to her own ears. What London incident? Dr. Morrison's expression shifted to something that might have been sympathy, if sympathy could exist in the context of such clinical manipulation. Ms. MacLeod, your memory displacement extends further than you realize. The relationship you remember with Marcus Hartwell, it ended much more traumatically than you're able to recall. Another message buzzed through to her phone. Run, Evelyn, now. This time she didn't question the source. Evelyn bolted. She crashed down the hillside with no regard for the path, stone and scrub grass blurring past as she fled toward the city below. Behind her, Dr. Morrison called her name, but Evelyn didn't look back. The woman's voice faded as distance grew between them, but the implications of what she'd learned chased her with every stumbling step. Research subject. Psychological experiment. Manufactured trauma designed to study how human minds break under impossible pressure. The carefully documented evidence she'd gathered wasn't proof of her sanity. It was data for someone's dissertation. Her phone continued to buzz with messages as she ran, but she didn't dare check them. She couldn't trust anything anymore. Couldn't distinguish between manipulation and reality. Couldn't even be certain that her own thoughts were entirely her own. The city rushed up to meet her as she fled the summit, but Edinburgh no longer looked like sanctuary. Every street could hide an observer. Every friendly face could mask a researcher. Every moment of apparent safety could be just another variable in an experiment designed to destroy her. And somewhere in the growing daylight, the real architects of her psychological torment were adjusting their methods, escalating their approach, preparing whatever came after their test subject learned the truth. The ordeal begins. Evelyn's feet hit the pavement at the base of Arthur's seat, but the solid ground offered no comfort. Her lungs burned from the reckless descent, her clothes were torn from scraping against stone, and blood seeped from cuts on her palms, but the physical pain paled against the psychological devastation coursing through her mind. Research subject. The words pounded with each footfall as she ran through the empty streets. Memory displacement. Her entire reality had been manufactured, choreographed, observed like a rat in a laboratory maze. Every moment of terror, every sleepless night questioning her sanity, every desperate attempt to authenticate her own experiences, all of it had been data collection. Her phone buzzed relentlessly in her pocket, but she couldn't bear to look. Was it Dr. Morrison, the mysterious ally who'd warned her to run? Another researcher adjusting variables in their grand experiment? The distinction no longer mattered. Every source of information was compromised, every apparent ally potentially another manipulator wearing a mask of concern. The Georgian streets of Newtown blurred past as muscle memory guided her toward her flat. But even that destination felt wrong now. If they'd been watching her since before she moved to Edinburgh, they knew where she lived, worked, shopped for groceries. Her entire carefully constructed new life was just another controlled environment for their study. The London incident. Dr. Morrison's words echoed with horrible implications. What had really happened with Marcus? What trauma had she blocked so completely that she couldn't access the memory? The woman had spoken of it like a known quantity, documented and catalogued for their research purposes. They knew her own history better than she did. Evelyn stumbled to a stop outside a 24-hour cafe, her reflection in the darkened window showing a woman who looked like she'd survived a natural disaster. Wild hair, torn clothing, eyes wide with the particular desperation of someone whose fundamental assumptions about reality had just exploded. She looked insane, which was exactly what they wanted. The realization hit with crystalline clarity. This moment, right now, standing disheveled and panicked on an Edinburgh street corner, this was the breaking point they'd been engineering. Dr. Morrison had revealed just enough truth to shatter her remaining stability while withholding the crucial details that might allow her to fight back. They were documenting her psychological collapse in real time. Her phone buzzed again. Against every instinct, she pulled it out. "They're not finished with you, Evelyn. The experiment enters phase 2 now. But you have one advantage they don't know about." The message came from a different number, a local Edinburgh exchange rather than the mobile numbers she'd been receiving. Someone else was in the game, someone Dr. Morrison hadn't mentioned. "What advantage?" she typed back, her fingers shaking. "You're not the only one who survived phase 1. But we need to meet now before they adjust their approach. Do you know the vault system beneath the Royal Mile?" The underground vaults, tourist attractions during the day, but accessible through maintenance entrances if you knew where to look. Dark, isolated, but also genuinely off the grid. No CCTV cameras, no digital monitoring. It was either the perfect place for allies to meet safely or the ideal location for her final elimination. "How do I know you're real?" she sent back. "Because I'm going to tell you what really happened in London. The trauma they've been exploiting isn't from your relationship with Marcus, it's from discovering his body." The words hit like ice water. Discovering his body. Not his disappearance, not the end of their relationship, his death and her involvement in finding him. Another message arrived immediately. "Marcus Hartwell was murdered, Evelyn. You were the one who found him. And whoever killed him has been using his identity to hunt down everyone who knew what really happened." The cafe window reflected a stranger's face back at her, a woman whose carefully ordered world had just revealed itself to be built on deliberately suppressed memories. The dead man at Edinburgh Castle hadn't been Marcus returned from Afghanistan. It had been his killer, wearing his face through technology Dr. Morrison had described, eliminating witnesses to his original crime. 7 women. 3 missing, 1 dead, all connected not by random selection for psychological research, but by their knowledge of Marcus Hartwell's murder. She wasn't a research subject. She was a witness being systematically eliminated. The streets around her suddenly felt alive with threat. Every early morning commuter could be surveillance. Every delivery van could hold equipment for tracking her movements. Every moment she stood exposed on the pavement increased the danger exponentially. But for the first time since spotting Marcus at Edinburgh Castle, she wasn't running from madness. She was running toward the truth. And finally, she had an ally who might help her survive the discovery. The ordeal was just beginning, but at least now she understood the real stakes. Her sanity wasn't the target. Her life was. The dark moment. The vault entrance lay hidden behind a maintenance door beneath Deacon Brody's tavern, accessible through an alley that reeked of centuries-old stone and modern desperation. Evelyn's hands trembled as she worked the lock with the code her anonymous ally had provided, 3 digits that opened into Edinburgh's buried past. The underground chambers stretched into darkness beyond her phone's flashlight beam, carved from bedrock and forgotten by history. Perfect for clandestine meetings, perfect for murder. She'd been waiting 20 minutes when footsteps echoed from the tunnel entrance. A woman emerged from the shadows, mid-40s, auburn hair, wearing a police constable's uniform that looked authentic down to the radio crackling with genuine dispatch chatter. "You came," the woman said, her relief evident. "I wasn't certain you would. Who are you?" "Detective Constable Sarah Chen. I've been investigating the disappearances Dr. Morrison mentioned." Chen's flashlight swept the vault walls, checking corners with professional thoroughness. "But not for the reasons she thinks." Evelyn pressed herself against the cold stone, every nerve screaming caution. "Prove you're real. Prove you're not another part of their experiment." Chen pulled out her warrant card, followed by her mobile phone displaying what appeared to be official police communications about missing persons cases. 3 women vanished after receiving messages about deceased partners. But when I investigated their backgrounds, I found something Morrison's research didn't include. Which was? They all lived in London between 2018 and 2019. They all frequented the same art galleries, the same coffee shops, and they all appeared on the same CCTV footage from the night Marcus Hartwell died. Chen's voice carried the weight of terrible discovery. "You were there too, Evelyn. The police have video of you leaving his flat the night he was murdered." The vault walls seemed to close in around her. "That's impossible. I would remember." Retrograde amnesia, trauma-induced memory loss. The human mind blocks experiences too devastating to process. Chen stepped closer, her expression mixing professional sympathy with urgent warning. "But the killer knows you were there. He's been systematically eliminating witnesses using the most psychologically devastating method possible, making you doubt your own sanity before he strikes." Evelyn's legs gave out. She slid down the stone wall, her mind reeling with implications that rewrote everything she thought she knew about herself. "What did I see? What happened that night? I don't know yet. But—" Chen's radio crackled with sudden urgency. A dispatcher's voice filled the vault. "All units, be advised. Detective Constable Sarah Chen reported missing 3 hours ago. Her vehicle was found abandoned near Arthur's Seat. Consider her disappearance connected to ongoing investigation." The blood drained from Chen's face as they both stared at the radio. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I never called in missing. I'm standing right here." Evelyn's phone buzzed. The message made her stomach plummet. "Did you really think we wouldn't know about DC Chen's investigation? She's been missing since yesterday, Evelyn. You're talking to her replacement." "No," Chen said, backing away as her own phone lit up with notifications. "No, this isn't. I remember driving here. I remember getting your location. Who sent you my location?" Evelyn's voice cut through the vault like a blade. Chen's face went blank for a moment, confusion flickering across her features. The message came from your phone number. You sent me the coordinates. I never sent you anything." The woman wearing Chen's face pulled her service weapon with mechanical precision. "Please remain calm, Ms. MacLeod. The psychological displacement you're experiencing is a normal part of the process." Evelyn scrambled backward deeper into the vault system, not Chen's, flashlight beam tracking her movement. "Who are you?" "I'm whoever you needed me to be to get you here." The false Chen's voice had lost all warmth, becoming clinical and detached. "Detective investigating your case. Ally with crucial information. Fellow survivor offering hope. We've become quite skilled at identifying exactly what psychological profile will gain a subject's trust. Where's the real Chen? Detective Constable Chen asked too many questions about Dr. Morrison's research funding. She discovered our study had unauthorized elements, corporate sponsors with interests beyond academic research. The weapon remained trained on Evelyn as her tormentor advanced through the narrow tunnel. She won't be asking more questions. Evelyn's phone buzzed one final time, Phase 2 complete. Subject isolated and contained. Preparing for memory extraction and elimination. The vault stretched behind her into deeper darkness, but she could hear water moving somewhere ahead. The old drainage systems, possibly connected to the city's storm sewers. Her only chance lay in the Edinburgh Underground she'd studied for her restoration work. If she could reach the connecting tunnels before the false Chen decided talking was finished. But as she turned to run, her flashlight illuminated something that stopped her cold. Sarah Chen's police uniform, folded neatly on the stone floor. Still warm. And beside it, 7 other sets of clothing. Different sizes, different styles, but all arranged with the same careful precision. She wasn't the first to be lured here. She was just the last. Evelyn's flashlight beam trembled across the clothing, each folded garment a testament to lives methodically erased. A teacher's cardigan, a nurse's scrubs, a banker's tailored blazer. All women, all witnesses, all silenced with the same terrifying efficiency. But it was what lay beneath the clothes that shattered everything she thought she understood about her situation. Photographs, dozens of them, spread across the stone floor in careful rows. Images of her throughout her entire life, not just recent surveillance photos but pictures from childhood, university, family gatherings she'd forgotten existed. Her 8th birthday party, her university graduation. The day she'd moved into her first London flat. And in every single photograph, standing somewhere in the background with subtle digital alterations to avoid detection, was the same face. Marcus Hartwell. Impossible, she whispered, her voice echoing in the vault. The false Chen's footsteps stopped behind her. You're beginning to understand. Evelyn's hands shook as she gathered the photographs. Marcus at her primary school sports day, barely visible among the parent spectators. Marcus in the corner of a university lecture hall she'd attended. Marcus reflected in the window of a coffee shop she'd visited years before they'd supposedly met. He was never your boyfriend, the false Chen said, her clinical tone making the revelation more horrifying. He was your assigned observer, a long-term study subject, just like you. The photographs told a story that rewrote her entire existence. Every chance meeting, every coincidental encounter, every moment she'd believed was serendipity, all orchestrated. Their entire relationship had been a psychological experiment spanning decades. Project Lazarus, the false Chen continued, testing whether deep psychological conditioning could create artificial emotional attachments strong enough to survive death. Marcus was trained from childhood to integrate into your life, to become psychologically indispensable. The relationship wasn't real for him. It was performance. Evelyn found a photograph that made her stomach lurch, her parents' funeral, taken from across the cemetery. She was 18, devastated by their car accident, supported by her aunt. And there in the background, Marcus, though she wouldn't meet him for another 3 years, documenting her emotional state at her most vulnerable moment. They've been studying trauma responses for decades, the false Chen said. How to create them, manipulate them, weaponize them. You were selected as a child because your psychological profile indicated optimal susceptibility to manufactured attachment. The water sound grew louder ahead of her, but Evelyn couldn't move. The photographs had revealed a truth more devastating than supernatural stalking or psychological research. Her entire adult life, every major relationship, every emotional development, every moment of healing after her parents' death had been artificially constructed by observers treating her like a laboratory animal. But something went wrong with the Marcus unit, the false Chen continued, advancing closer. He began developing genuine emotional responses to his target. The conditioning broke down. He started believing the relationship was real. Evelyn's flashlight found another cluster of images. Marcus in locations she'd never seen him. A clinical facility, surrounded by researchers in lab coats, electrodes attached to his head, his eyes vacant, being programmed like a computer. When he refused to terminate the relationship on schedule, when he started trying to protect you from the study's final phase, elimination became necessary. The false Chen's weapon remained trained on her. But killing him created an unexpected complication. I found the body. The memory crashed back with devastating clarity. She'd arrived at his flat for dinner, used the key he'd given her, found him dead on his kitchen floor with precise surgical incisions indicating professional assassination. She'd called the police, given statements, identified the body. You found evidence of his true identity, his real name, his conditioning records, documentation of Project Lazarus. The trauma wasn't from discovering a boyfriend's death. It was from learning your entire adult life had been a lie. The photographs scattered as Evelyn's legs gave out completely. Marcus hadn't been an obsessive ex-boyfriend. He'd been a victim like her, programmed to love someone who'd been programmed to love him back. Their relationship had been real to both of them, but built on a foundation of systematic psychological manipulation. The memory suppression was necessary to continue the study, the false Chen said. But witness elimination proved challenging. You'd become too psychologically valuable to simply murder. So we developed a more elegant solution. Evelyn's phone lit up with a message from her own number. The real experiment isn't about trauma, Evelyn. It's about resurrection. How much psychological pressure does it take to make someone believe a dead person has returned? How far will grief drive someone toward madness before they accept impossible realities? Marcus isn't dead, the false Chen said, holstering her weapon. But he's not alive either. He's become something new, a psychological construct maintained by advanced technology and your own desperate need for the relationship to continue. We've learned to preserve consciousness beyond death, transfer it into synthetic carriers. The water sound ahead suddenly made sense. Not drainage, machinery. Servers humming in climate-controlled chambers. The underground vault connected to a facility where consciousness could be harvested, stored, deployed. Marcus had been murdered, but they'd kept his mind alive, trapped in digital form, forced to participate in tormenting the woman he'd genuinely learned to love. The revelation wasn't that she was losing her sanity. It was that she'd never been sane at all, because her entire reality had been artificially constructed from birth. And now they were ready to harvest her consciousness too. The false Chen's words hung in the air like poison, but something had shifted inside Evelyn. The devastating revelations about her manufactured life, about Marcus's true nature, about the decades of manipulation. Instead of breaking her completely, they crystallized into something harder than despair. Rage. Pure, clarifying fury at being treated like a laboratory rat her entire existence. At having her capacity for love weaponized against her, at Marcus being murdered for the crime of developing genuine feelings within their artificial relationship. You made one mistake, she said, rising from the scattered photographs with newfound steadiness. The false Chen tilted her head with mechanical curiosity. What mistake would that be? You told me Marcus fought back when he learned the truth. You said he tried to protect me from the final phase. Evelyn's voice carried a steel she hadn't known she possessed. That means this whole system has vulnerabilities. People can break their conditioning. They can choose to resist. She grabbed one of the photographs. Marcus with electrodes attached to his head, his eyes still holding a spark of defiance despite the clinical setting. If he could fight your programming, so can I. The water sound ahead wasn't just machinery. It was her advantage. Every restoration project had taught her to read building systems, to understand how old structures connected to modern infrastructure. The Edinburgh Underground was a maze, but it was a maze she'd studied professionally. While the false Chen had been delivering her monologue, Evelyn had been listening to the acoustics. The water flow patterns indicated junction points where multiple tunnel systems converged. Places where she could disappear into passages too narrow for pursuit, or emerge at locations her captors wouldn't anticipate. Your psychological profile indicated you would collapse entirely upon learning the truth, the false Chen said, raising her weapon again. This resistance wasn't predicted. Maybe that's because your profile was based on a manufactured personality. Evelyn backed toward the water sound, keeping her flashlight trained on her pursuer. But trauma changes people. Real trauma, not your controlled experiments. And finding Marcus's body, learning the truth, that broke something in me that you can't predict or control. She'd reached a junction where the vault connected to older drainage systems. The false Chen would have to follow her through passages designed for medieval Edinburgh, not modern surveillance equipment. Her psychological advantage was about to become a physical one. The other women, Evelyn said, stalling while she assessed the tunnel options. The witnesses you eliminated, did they fight back too? Some attempted resistance. All ultimately succumbed to the pressure. But I'm different. Understanding flooded through her with absolute certainty. I'm not just a witness to Marcus's murder, I'm the primary subject of a decades-long study. You can't simply eliminate me. I'm too valuable. All that data, all that research investment. You need me alive for the consciousness transfer. The false Chen's expression flickered, the first crack in her clinical composure. Subject termination has been authorized if extraction proves impossible. But it would be a massive research loss, wouldn't it? All those years of conditioning, all that psychological mapping, wasted if you have to kill me traditionally. Evelyn smiled grimly. You're not here to murder me, you're here to capture me, which means I have more room to maneuver than you're admitting. She turned and plunged into the narrow drainage tunnel, her flashlight beam dancing across stone walls carved centuries before digital surveillance existed. Behind her, the false Chen's pursuit created echoes that would mask the direction of Evelyn's movement through the underground maze. But more importantly, her phone still worked down here. And if Marcus's consciousness truly existed in some digital form, if they'd preserved his mind to torment her, then perhaps that preservation worked both ways. She pulled out her phone while navigating the tunnel system, typing rapidly. Marcus. If any part of you can access this, if you can break through their control systems even temporarily, I know what they did to you, I know what they did to us, but I also know you fought back once. Help me fight back now. The response came immediately, but not from her usual number. From the same digital void that had been sending system notifications, Evelyn. God, Evelyn. I've been trying to reach you, but they monitor everything. The consciousness transfer, it works both ways. If you can get to their server facility, if you can access the main terminals. Another message, this one clearly from her captors. Subject has established contact with preserved construct. Initiating emergency protocols. But a third message appeared simultaneously, different formatting. Urgent, the basement of the Royal Observatory. They're using the historical building as cover for the server farm. Equipment access through the old Victorian tunnel system. I can guide you, but they'll cut my connection soon. The false Chen's footsteps were fading behind her, the pursuit hindered by passages designed for water flow, not human movement. But ahead, Evelyn could see light filtering down from street-level grates, multiple exit points, multiple choices. For the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't running from something. She was running toward it. The Royal Observatory loomed against Edinburgh's night sky, like a monument to humanity's need to understand the incomprehensible. Evelyn emerged from the Victorian tunnel system beneath its foundations, her clothes torn from the underground journey, her hands scraped raw from crawling through passages that hadn't seen human traffic in decades. But her phone still glowed with Marcus's desperate messages, each one a lifeline pulling her toward whatever passed for salvation in this digitized nightmare. They're cutting my access, his latest message read. Server room is 3 levels down from the main building. I can hold the security systems for maybe 10 minutes once you're inside. After that, you're on your own. She pressed herself against the stone foundation, watching security cameras sweep the courtyard in mechanical patterns. The observatory's historical significance provided perfect cover for illegal research, who would question increased security around astronomical equipment worth millions. But Marcus had been right about the building's vulnerabilities. The Victorian-era construction included service tunnels that predated modern surveillance, passages designed for maintenance access that now offered her a way inside. There's something else. Another message appeared. The consciousness transfer. They didn't just preserve my mind, they preserved my knowledge of their entire operation. Names, locations, other test subjects. If we can access their main database, we can expose everything. Evelyn's breath caught. This wasn't just about escaping or even surviving anymore. It was about stopping them from creating more victims, more manufactured relationships, more people like her who'd been psychologically violated from birth without ever knowing the truth. But the weight of what she was committing to pressed down on her like the stone walls she'd crawled through. No training for this kind of infiltration. No weapons except her fury and her professional knowledge of old buildings. Against an organization sophisticated enough to maintain consciousness beyond death, to manipulate human psychology for decades, to make people disappear without trace. The false Chen would have reported her location by now. Other operatives would be converging on the observatory. Every minute she spent in preparation was another step closer to recapture, to becoming another neatly folded set of clothes in an underground vault. She thought about the photographs scattered across the stone floor, her entire life revealed as performance, every meaningful relationship exposed as manipulation, about Marcus fighting his conditioning hard enough to die for it, about the other women whose elimination had been deemed more efficient than their continued existence. The rage crystallized into something colder, more focused. Commitment. "I'm going in," she typed back. "Whatever happens, thank you for trying to protect me. Even if it was real for you only at the end, that still matters." "It was real for me from the beginning." His response came immediately. "The conditioning was supposed to prevent genuine attachment, but something about you broke through their programming. That's why they had to kill me. I stopped following orders." She moved toward the service entrance, a maintenance door hidden behind overgrown hedges that her restoration work had taught her to spot. The lock mechanism was modern, but Marcus's digital presence swept through the observatory's security grid like a ghost in the machine. The door clicked open. "Security cameras are looped for the next 8 minutes, he messaged. "Service elevator to the basement levels is at the end of the main corridor." "But Evelyn, once you access their servers, once you start downloading their files, they'll know exactly where you are. There won't be another chance to run." She stepped inside the darkened observatory, her footsteps muffled by carpet that had absorbed decades of scholarly footfall. Emergency lighting cast everything in red shadows, giving the scientific instruments the appearance of torture devices. Down the corridor, she could see the elevator Marcus had indicated, her passage into the heart of their operation. But also her passage into a confrontation she might not survive. "I know the risks," she typed, while moving through the building's silent corridors. "But how many other people are they doing this to right now? How many other women think they're losing their minds when they're really being systematically tormented for research data? I don't know, but their files will..." The elevator doors opened at her approach, Marcus's digital infiltration clearing her path toward the basement levels. As the car descended, carrying her toward servers that contained his preserved consciousness and evidence of decades of psychological crimes, Evelyn felt the last of her old self falling away. The frightened art restoration specialist who'd trembled at shadows was gone. The woman who'd believed love could bloom accidentally, organically, was gone. The victim who'd accepted that some mysteries were too dangerous to solve was gone. What remained was someone harder. Someone who'd been forged in underground vaults and impossible revelations, and the discovery that even death couldn't stop love from trying to protect what it cherished. Someone ready to finish what Marcus had started when he chose her over his programming. The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto a basement that hummed with the electronic heartbeat of preserved minds. Time to wake the dead and make them testify. The basement stretched before her like a cathedral of technology. Banks of servers rising toward the vaulted ceiling in perfect rows, their blue LEDs pulsing like electronic prayer candles. The air hummed with the white noise of cooling systems and hard drives spinning at impossible speeds, each unit containing fragments of human consciousness preserved beyond their bodies' deaths. Somewhere in this digital mausoleum, Marcus waited. Not alive, but not truly gone either. Evelyn stepped into the server farm, her flashlight now unnecessary in the ambient glow of status lights. The main terminal sat at the center of the room like an altar, multiple screens displaying data streams that moved too fast for human comprehension. But she'd learned to read building systems, to understand how complex structures functioned, and this was just another kind of architecture. Her phone vibrated with a final message, Terminal 3. Download protocol is already loaded, but they know you're here now. Maybe 2 minutes before, the text cut off mid-sentence as every screen in the facility flashed red. Emergency protocols engaging. Lockdown initiated. No more time for hesitation. She ran toward the main terminal, her footsteps echoing between the server towers. Behind her, the elevator she'd used engaged with mechanical finality. No escape route, just forward momentum toward whatever truth these machines contained. Her hands flew across the keyboard, muscle memory from years of digital restoration work guiding her through file trees and security barriers that Marcus had already weakened from the inside. Project Lazarus. File after file cascaded across the screen, psychological profiles dating back decades, consciousness preservation protocols, lists of subjects categorized by elimination status. Sarah Mitchell, terminated. Janet Morrison, terminated. Rebecca Thompson, consciousness successfully harvested. And there, highlighted in active status, Evelyn MacLeod, final phase authorized. She plugged in her phone, downloading everything while scanning the data that revealed the true scope of their operation. Not just individual women being psychologically manipulated, but entire family lines studied across generations. Children identified in primary school for optimal conditioning susceptibility. Relationships manufactured not just romantically, but professionally, socially. Every meaningful connection in their subjects' lives carefully orchestrated. Her art restoration career hadn't been talent or passion. It had been programming, steering her toward work that required isolation, travel, minimal social connections outside their controlled parameters. The servers around her began spinning faster, access protocols fighting against unauthorized data extraction. But Marcus's preserved consciousness was still fighting from within their own system, creating digital chaos that kept her terminal operational long enough to capture decades of evidence. A new window opened on her screen, not files, but a real-time communication interface. Evelyn. The text appeared with familiar urgency. It's really me, whatever part of me they managed to preserve. Her hands shook as she typed back while files continued downloading. Are you in pain? Being stored like this? Not pain exactly, more like dreaming while awake, but conscious of being trapped inside the dream. They use preserved minds as processing power for their psychological modeling. We're not just stored, we're forced to compute their research. Horror washed over her as she understood. The consciousness transfer wasn't preservation, it was digital slavery. Marcus and every other victim whose awareness they'd captured were being used as biological computers, forced to participate in analyzing future subjects. How many others? Dozens, maybe hundreds. Some have been here for years, modeling trauma responses, computing optimal manipulation strategies. Evelyn, you have to destroy the servers. Not just download the evidence, destroy everything. It's the only way to free us. Her download hit 90% as alarms began wailing throughout the facility. Heavy footsteps in the corridor above, tactical teams converging on the basement. The false Chen's voice echoed down the stairwell, coordinating the final phase of subject capture. But tucked behind Terminal 3, Evelyn spotted something her restoration work had trained her to recognize: building infrastructure. Climate control systems, power distribution, emergency protocols. The server farm's environmental controls were integrated with the observatory's historical heating system. Victorian era, boilers, converted to modern electrical distribution. She could bring down more than just the computers. Marcus, if I overload the power grid, if I destroy everything, will that free you, or will it just be murder? The response took longer than usual, servers struggling under the strain of unauthorized access and approaching shutdown. I don't know, but I know what we are now isn't living. and I know they'll use us to hurt more people like you. Do it." The download hit 100% as she heard tactical boots on the basement stairs. Evidence secured, but the real choice still ahead of her. She could run, try to escape with the files, expose their operation through legal channels that might take years to bring justice. Or she could ensure they never used another preserved consciousness to model trauma, never forced another digital slave to compute against their will. Her hands moved toward the environmental controls, toward a choice that would define not just her survival, but whether love, even digitally preserved love, could choose sacrifice over self-preservation. Everything she'd learned, every skill she'd developed, every moment of manufactured emotion that had somehow become real despite its artificial origins, all of it led to this single decision: time to test whether the dead could finally rest. Evelyn's fingers hovered over the environmental control panel as boots thundered down the basement stairs. The Victorian-era system displayed in neat digital readouts: boiler pressure, electrical distribution, emergency venting protocols. One overload command would cascade through the entire building's infrastructure, turning the server farm into a tomb for the consciousness trapped within. Subject located, the false Chen's voice cut through the electronic hum. Terminate digital access immediately. The screens around Evelyn began dying one by one, Marcus's presence being systematically purged from the system. But the environmental controls operated on a separate network, building safety systems too critical to integrate with experimental technology. "Wait." The voice came from behind her, but it wasn't the clinical tone of her pursuer. She turned to find Marcus standing between the server towers, not the digital ghost she'd been communicating with, but somehow physically present. His Royal Guard uniform was gone, replaced by simple clothes that flickered at the edges like a projection struggling to maintain cohesion. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "The consciousness transfer works both ways," he said, his form wavering as servers strained under the burden of manifesting digital awareness in physical space. "When they preserved our minds, they created a bridge. I can exist here temporarily, but it's burning through their entire system." Around them, server towers began smoking as processing demands exceeded their design limits. The temperature in the basement spiked as cooling systems failed under the impossible load of rendering human consciousness into visible form. "You're killing yourself," Evelyn realized. "I'm already dead." His smile carried all the warmth she remembered, despite its ghostly transparency. "But I can give you something they never counted on, a fighting chance." The tactical team reached the bottom of the stairs, weapons drawn, but stopped short when they saw Marcus's impossible presence. The false Chen pushed through their ranks, her clinical composure cracking for the first time. Manifestation protocol was theoretical only, she said, more to herself than her team. The power requirements alone should have made it impossible, Marcus finished, turning toward his killers. "But you never accounted for emotional override, the preserved consciousness fighting back against its programming." He stepped forward, his form becoming more solid as more servers sacrificed their processing power to maintain his presence. "Did you really think you could torture someone's mind for years without creating something you couldn't predict or control?" "Stand down, construct," Chen commanded, but her voice carried uncertainty now. "You're damaging critical research infrastructure." "Good." Marcus's attention returned to Evelyn. The environmental controls, they're connected to the building's original pneumatic message system, Victorian engineering that feeds into the foundation ventilation. If you overload the heating system, the pressure release will channel directly into the server farm's cooling intakes. Evelyn's hands moved across the control panel, her restoration knowledge translating 19th century building systems into 21st century destruction. The other consciousnesses, will this hurt them? "We voted while I was manifesting," Marcus said softly. "Unanimous decision. We're tired of being used to hurt people." Behind him, the tactical team raised their weapons despite the impossibility of shooting a digital projection. But Chen held up a hand, her scientific fascination overriding tactical protocol. "The emotional resonance is maintaining coherence," she murmured. "Subject attachment proving stronger than termination protocols. This could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness preservation. Your understanding, Marcus said, his voice carrying decades of digital fury, ends tonight. Evelyn entered the final override command, as more servers erupted in sparks around them. The building's heating system, designed to warm stone halls through Edinburgh winters, began channeling superheated air directly into the server farm's environmental controls. Emergency klaxons wailed as ancient infrastructure met modern technology in catastrophic failure. Facility evacuation in 60 seconds, the automated system announced. The false Chen finally drew her weapon, aiming not at Marcus's fading projection, but at Evelyn. Research data cannot be permitted to... Marcus stepped between them, his form solidifying one final time as every remaining server in the facility devoted its power to his protection. The bullets passed through him harmlessly, but the electromagnetic pulse of his manifestation sent every piece of electronic equipment in the basement into critical failure. "I love you," he told Evelyn as his image began fragmenting. "Not because they programmed me to, because somehow, despite everything they did, you became more real to me than the life I'd lost." "I love you too," she whispered, as his form dissolved into static. The server towers collapsed in sequence, consciousness and circuitry dying together in liberation. Ancient stones cracked as Victorian heating systems overloaded, bringing down a century of careful restoration along with decades of digital enslavement. Evelyn ran toward the emergency stairs as the facility burned behind her, carrying the downloaded evidence that would expose their crimes and the knowledge that sometimes love, even artificially created, could choose sacrifice over survival. The dead were finally free to rest. The emergency stairwell filled with smoke as Evelyn climbed toward ground level, the downloaded evidence burning like a brand against her chest where her phone pressed against her ribs. Behind her, the destruction she'd unleashed sent tremors through Edinburgh's ancient foundations, Victorian engineering and digital consciousness dying together in spectacular cascade failure. But with each step upward, the weight of what she'd sacrificed pressed heavier than the smoke filling her lungs. She'd destroyed the only trace of Marcus that remained in this world, the man who'd died protecting her 5 years ago, who'd fought his digital conditioning to love her genuinely, who'd manifested one final time to ensure her escape, gone now, erased as completely as if he'd never existed at all. The emergency exit burst open onto the observatory's main floor, where Edinburgh's summer festival continued, in blissful ignorance just beyond the walls. Tourists posed for photographs while beneath their feet, decades of psychological crimes burned away in liberation. Evelyn stumbled through the building's corridors, her restoration training automatically cataloging the structural damage that would soon bring down this entire wing. Her phone buzzed with emergency notifications, not from Marcus, never from Marcus again, but from news feeds already picking up reports of explosions at the Royal Observatory. The cover story would write itself. Gas leak in the renovated basement. Tragic loss of historical infrastructure. Investigation pending. The evidence she carried would tell a different story, but at what cost? Outside, sirens wailed across Edinburgh as emergency responders converged on the observatory. Evelyn melted into the festival crowds, just another tourist fleeing the commotion, her phone containing proof of crimes that spanned decades and a love story that no one would ever believe. She found herself walking toward Edinburgh Castle, drawn by muscle memory toward the courtyard where this nightmare had begun 3 days ago. The changing of the guard ceremony continued on schedule, different soldiers now standing where Marcus had once been posted, where his digital ghost had worn a uniform and played human while fighting programming that should have made genuine emotion impossible. The ancient stones looked different now, viewed through eyes that had seen how deep manipulation could reach, how completely a life could be orchestrated without its subject ever knowing. Her art restoration career, her social isolation, her previous relationships that had never quite worked, all of it potentially designed to shape her into the perfect subject for their research. Everything except Marcus breaking his conditioning. She sat on the same bench where she'd first spotted him in the crowd, where terror had driven her to confess her fear to a stranger. Now she understood that nothing about that encounter had been accidental, but somehow the connection they'd forged had transcended its artificial origins. Her phone contained enough evidence to destroy Project Lazarus, to expose the consciousness preservation experiments, to bring justice for every woman who'd been systematically tormented in the name of research. Legal proceedings would take years, but the digital trail was irrefutable. Psychological profiles, elimination orders, server logs documenting digital slavery. But Marcus was gone. The price of victory crystallized with brutal clarity as tourists flowed around her, their lives continuing unmarked by tragedy. She'd won. The facility was destroyed, the evidence secured, the enslaved consciousnesses finally freed from their digital torment. Justice was possible now, at the cost of any chance to truly be with the man who died twice to protect her. The weight of that sacrifice settled into her bones like Edinburgh's persistent chill. She could have tried to preserve his digital presence somehow, could have attempted to extract his consciousness before destroying the servers. But he'd asked her not to. He'd chosen liberation over preservation, peace over the possibility of continued existence as something trapped between life and death. She'd honored that choice, and now she would carry the consequences forever. The festival crowds began thinning as afternoon shifted toward evening, families returning to hotels and tour groups dispersing toward dinner reservations. Evelyn remained on the bench, watching shadows lengthen across cobblestones where she'd first learned that reality could fracture, that love could bloom in impossible circumstances, that some prices were too high to calculate until after they'd been paid. Her phone buzzed with a final notification. News alert confirming the observatory's basement levels had suffered total collapse. No casualties reported, investigation ongoing. No mention of the dozens of preserved minds that had finally found peace in digital destruction. No acknowledgement of the love that had chosen sacrifice over survival. No recognition that sometimes the cost of winning was learning to live without the very thing that had made victory possible. Evelyn stood slowly, Marcus's downloaded evidence secure in her pocket, his absence echoing in her chest where hope had briefly lived. Time to begin the long work of justice, of testimony, of ensuring their crimes never repeated. Time to learn whether love could survive not just death, but the conscious choice to let death remain final. The dead were free to rest. The living had to learn to carry their memory forward. The walk from Edinburgh Castle to the Royal Mile stretched before Evelyn like a bridge between two different versions of herself, the woman who'd trembled 3 days ago at the sight of a dead man's face, and whoever she was becoming now, carrying evidence that could topple governments and memories that would never make sense to anyone else. The festival crowds parted around her as she moved through the ancient streets, their laughter and music a strange counterpoint to the smoke still rising behind her. Emergency vehicles screamed past toward the observatory, but the tourists barely paused in their revelry. Edinburgh had seen centuries of tragedies and celebrations. One more crisis would be absorbed into its stones like all the others. Her phone felt impossibly heavy in her pocket. Not just the physical weight of the device, but the burden of what it contained. Bank records showing payments to assassins. Psychological profiles of dozens of women marked for elimination. Server logs documenting years of digital torture. Enough evidence to expose Project Lazarus and everyone connected to it, but no way to bring Marcus back. The rational part of her mind tried to process what she'd experienced over the past 72 hours. Military contractors had faked her boyfriend's death, preserved his consciousness, used his digitized emotions as a weapon against her while simultaneously forcing him to participate in his own programming. The scope of their crimes defied comprehension. The emotional part of her mind simply screamed into the void where hope used to live. She found herself standing outside her flat, staring up at windows that had once represented sanctuary. 6 months ago, she'd fled London believing she was escaping an obsessive ex-boyfriend. Now she understood she'd been running from a conspiracy that had orchestrated her entire adult life, moving her like a chess piece toward their ultimate objective. Everything had been calculated. Everything except Marcus fighting back. The key turned stiffly in her lock. She'd forgotten how long she'd been away, how much had changed since she'd last stood in this hallway. The restoration projects spread across her kitchen table looked foreign now, artifacts from someone else's life. Had her passion for preserving damaged art been genuine, or just another layer of programming designed to isolate her from meaningful connections? She'd never know for certain. That was perhaps the cruelest aspect of psychological manipulation. It poisoned even authentic emotions with doubt. Her laptop sat where she'd left it, covered in museum catalogs and authentication reports. Normal life, waiting to be resumed. Except nothing would ever be normal again. The evidence transfer began automatically when she connected her phone. Financial records, personnel files, video footage of digital torture that would haunt prosecutors' dreams. Years of legal proceedings stretched ahead, testimony that would sound like science fiction, justice that could never truly balance the scales. But it was something. Marcus had died, twice, to give her this chance. A soft knock at her door made her freeze. For a moment, irrational hope flared that somehow, impossibly, he'd found another way back to her. But when she looked through the peephole, she saw Detective Inspector Sarah Morrison from Edinburgh Police, badge visible, expression grave. "Miss MacLeod? I'm investigating the incident at the Royal Observatory. Could we speak?" Reality crashed back with brutal clarity. Of course there would be questions, official investigations, a story to construct that would protect classified operations while ensuring justice for their victims. She opened the door, and Morrison stepped inside with the careful movements of someone who'd seen enough crime scenes to recognize when a person was holding themselves together through pure willpower. "Are you injured? We have reports of civilians in the building during the explosion." "I'm fine," Evelyn said, the lie automatic. She was destroyed, rebuilt, and destroyed again, but her body remained intact. "I was visiting the exhibition when the alarm started. Got out with everyone else." Morrison nodded, making notes. "Strange thing, though. Security cameras show you entering but not leaving, almost like you vanished for several hours." The moment of truth arrived sooner than expected. Evelyn could maintain the fiction, claim confusion and trauma, hope the official investigation would cover up anything too sensitive to prosecute publicly. Or she could trust that sometimes justice required complete transparency. Marcus had chosen sacrifice over self-preservation. She could choose truth over safety. "Detective Inspector," she said carefully, "what I'm about to show you will change how you understand this case. But it's going to sound impossible." Morrison's expression sharpened with professional interest. "Try me." Evelyn opened her laptop, the downloaded evidence glowing on the screen like digital judgment day. 3 days ago, I thought my biggest problem was an obsessive ex-boyfriend who'd followed me to Edinburgh. I was wrong. How wrong? The kind of wrong that gets you targeted by military contractors who preserve consciousness and use digital ghosts as psychological weapons. Morrison stared at her for a long moment, then sat down heavily. "Miss MacLeod, I think you'd better start from the beginning." Outside her window, Edinburgh's ancient skyline stretched toward the horizon, stones that had witnessed centuries of human drama now hosting one more impossible story. The dead were finally free to rest. The living had to learn what came next, the return. 3 hours later, Detective Inspector Morrison sat in stunned silence, her notebook filled with details that would require entirely new categories in the police database. The laptop screen cast blue light across both their faces as the final pieces of evidence scrolled past: bank transfers, elimination orders, consciousness preservation protocols that read like fever dreams written in bureaucratic language. "This will have to go through GCHQ," Morrison said finally. "National security implications, classified contractor oversight. The investigation will take years. But you believe me, it wasn't a question. The evidence was too comprehensive, too detailed to fabricate. I believe you've uncovered something that makes every conspiracy theory I've ever dismissed seem quaint by comparison." Morrison closed her notebook with deliberate precision. "The question is, what happens to you now?" Evelyn hadn't considered that part. For 3 days, survival had been the only objective. Escape the facility, destroy the evidence, honor Marcus's sacrifice. She hadn't thought beyond the immediate crisis to what remained afterward. "Witness protection will be necessary," Morrison continued. "These people killed to protect their research, They won't simply accept exposure and prosecution. More running. The words tasted bitter. 6 months ago, she'd fled London to escape what she'd thought was an obsessive ex-boyfriend. Now she'd have to disappear again, this time from enemies who commanded military resources and decades of experience in making problems vanish permanently. Different kind of running, Morrison assured her. Official protection, new identity, relocation assistance, regular security check-ins. Not perfect, but better than facing them alone. Through her window, Edinburgh's festival lights twinkled across the Royal Mile. Somewhere in those celebrating crowds were tourists taking photographs, families sharing dinners, couples falling in love, normal people living normal lives unmarked by impossible conspiracies or digital ghosts or the weight of evidence that could topple governments. She envied them desperately. "There's something else," Morrison said gently. "The explosion at the observatory. Preliminary reports suggest the basement contained computational equipment far beyond what any research facility should possess. Whatever you destroyed down there, it was significant. Good." The word came out harder than she'd intended. It needed to burn. Morrison studied her with the careful attention of someone trained to read trauma in all its forms. "You lost someone important in that facility, didn't you? Someone whose death isn't going to appear in any official casualty reports." Evelyn's throat tightened. How could she explain that she'd lost the same person twice? Once to military contractors who'd faked his death, then again to her own choice to honor his request for final peace. How could she describe love that had transcended digital conditioning only to die in liberation? "Yes," she said simply. "Someone important." Morrison nodded without pressing for details. Loss is loss, regardless of circumstances. Even when justice is served, grief remains. Outside, church bells chimed the hour across Edinburgh's ancient skyline. 7 o'clock, time when couples would be choosing restaurants, when families would be planning tomorrow's adventures, when the ordinary rhythms of life continued their eternal dance. Evelyn understood now that she would never rejoin that dance completely. The knowledge she carried, the experiences that had reshaped her understanding of reality itself, would always separate her from the innocent world of people who believed love followed predictable patterns and death remained permanent. But perhaps that separation contained its own purpose. "When the investigation begins," she said, "I want to testify personally, not just submit evidence, actually appear in court, face whatever's left of their organization, tell the story publicly." "That's dangerous," Morrison warned. "Witness testimony can be delivered remotely, through secure video links. No need to expose yourself unnecessarily." "They turned my entire life into a lie," Evelyn said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "Used my emotions as raw material for psychological weapons. Made the man I loved participate in his own torture for years. Public testimony isn't unnecessary. It's justice." Morrison made another note. "Your choice. Though I suspect you'll feel differently once the initial shock wears off. Trauma has a way of reshaping our sense of what we're capable of handling." "Maybe." Evelyn closed the laptop, sealing away the evidence that would reshape both their lives in the months ahead. "But I'm not the same person who trembled at shadows 3 days ago. Whatever they turned me into through years of manipulation, I'm choosing to become something else now." The festival crowds below moved through streets that had witnessed centuries of human drama. Their laughter, drifting up through her open window, like a reminder that joy persisted even after impossible loss. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, official statements, the beginning of legal proceedings that would take years to complete. Tonight, she would grieve Marcus properly, not as a victim of psychological manipulation or a digital ghost trapped in servers, but as a man who died twice to protect her, and whose love had transcended every attempt to weaponize it. The dead were finally free to rest. The living had learned what came next. The new beginning. 6 months later, Evelyn stood in the witness box of Edinburgh's High Court, her voice steady as she concluded testimony that had taken 3 days to deliver. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, government officials, families of other victims who'd emerged once the Project Lazarus revelations broke international headlines. Somewhere in the gallery, Detective Inspector Morrison offered an encouraging nod. "Thank you, Miss MacLeod," the prosecutor said. "No further questions." The defense had long since abandoned attempts to discredit her evidence. The digital trail was too comprehensive, too damning. 17 former military contractors now faced charges ranging from fraud to crimes against humanity. The consciousness preservation technology had been declared illegal under international law. Justice, slow and imperfect, was finally taking shape. As Evelyn stepped down from the witness box, she felt the weight of responsibility lifting from her shoulders for the first time in months. She'd kept her promise to Marcus. Their story had been told, their truth acknowledged by the world. Outside the courthouse, autumn sunlight painted Edinburgh's ancient stones in shades of gold and amber. The festival crowds were long gone, replaced by the gentler rhythms of residents going about their daily lives. Evelyn pulled her coat closer and walked toward the Royal Mile, muscle memory carrying her toward the place where everything had changed. The small cafe she'd discovered near the castle served excellent tea and offered corner tables perfect for quiet reflection. She'd become a regular over the past months, the staff now familiar with the woman who sat alone with her laptop, working on restoration projects that helped fund her extended stay in Edinburgh. Her art restoration business had evolved since the trial preparations began. Word had spread through academic circles about her expertise in damaged pieces. Professor Emeritus who'd heard her testimony began sending projects her way, manuscripts and paintings that required patient, careful healing. The work felt appropriate somehow, spending her days restoring beauty that others had tried to destroy. "The usual?" asked Jamie, the young barista who'd learned to deliver her tea without unnecessary conversation on difficult days. "Please." Evelyn settled into her corner table, opening her laptop to review the latest commission, a 17th-century portrait damaged in a house fire, the subject's face partially obscured by smoke and time. Delicate work, requiring months of careful attention to reveal what lay beneath the damage. Her phone chimed with a message from Dr. Sarah Chen, the therapist Morrison had recommended. "How did today feel?" "Remember, completing testimony is a significant milestone. Be patient with whatever emotions surface." Evelyn typed back, strange, relieved, but also empty. "Like I've been holding my breath for months and suddenly don't know how to exhale properly. That's normal. We'll discuss it Thursday." Normal. Such a peculiar word for someone whose understanding of reality had been shattered and rebuilt. But perhaps normalcy was something you created rather than something you returned to. These quiet mornings in the cafe, the steady work of restoration, the gradual process of building trust in her own perceptions, all of it felt like constructing a new foundation rather than repairing an old one. Her laptop contained a folder she rarely opened, filled with news articles about the trial, academic papers analyzing the ethical implications of consciousness preservation, documentaries being produced about Project Lazarus. The world had been forced to confront questions about the nature of identity, the boundaries of technology, the dangers of unchecked military research. Marcus had become a symbol, the digital ghost who'd chosen love over programming, sacrifice over survival. Memorial services had been held in 3 countries for the victims of consciousness preservation experiments. His name was carved into a monument outside Cambridge's Computer Science Building. But for Evelyn, he remained something simpler and more complex than a symbol. He was the man who died twice to protect her, whose love had transcended every attempt to weaponize, whose final choice had freed them both. The cafe's warmth settled around her as afternoon light streamed through windows that had witnessed centuries of Edinburgh's stories. Somewhere in this ancient city, other people were falling in love, ending relationships, making choices that would reshape their understanding of what was possible. Life continued its eternal dance of connection and loss. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw your testimony on the news. What you did took courage. Thank you. A friend." Similar messages had been arriving for months, from other victims of psychological experiments, from researchers horrified by their colleagues' actions, from people who'd simply been moved by her story. Each message reminded her that speaking truth, however painful, created ripples that reached far beyond her own healing. Outside the cafe windows, Edinburgh Castle stood silhouetted against the sky, its ancient stones holding secrets from 1,000 different eras. Tomorrow, she would return to her restoration work, continue building the quiet life she'd chosen, carry forward the memory of love that had transcended impossible circumstances. The dead were finally free to rest. The living had learned not just to survive, but to transform survival into something resembling peace. Marcus would have approved, she thought, closing her laptop as golden light faded into evening. Love, even when it couldn't conquer death, could still choose what came after.